Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to your Flip classroom today.
Yeah, not bad, not bad. All right, welcome back to your Flip classroom and our continuing discussion of post-Napoleonic Europe.
No, don't. Not yet. What you said? I'm sorry. Go ahead. What am I supposed to do?
All right, so you're gonna clap. Okay.
Okay.
Or how about I'll clap
okay.
for you, okay? The clap is so that like the audio spikes out so I can see where to cut it down to, okay? For the first one you say, welcome back, Honors.
Okay.
Go ahead and say it.
Welcome back, Honors.
No, that's not for the recording.
Welcome back, Honors.
Yeah, you're going to say that,
okay?
And then you're going to just be like, welcome back to your Flip classroom.
Okay.
Okay.
That's it.
And
that's one.
And then I'll take care of it, yeah.
Okay.
And I got to remember what I'm teaching them right now.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. Okay. You ready?
No. All right.
All right, and then we'll just like ad-lib, improv a little bit. Okay. All right, you ready?
Okay.
Ready? All right.
Welcome back, Honors.
Welcome back to your Flip classroom.
Welcome back to your Flip classroom from North Carolina.
No.
That's what Lenny does. Okay. All right.
All right, you ready? You ready? That's right. Welcome back, Honors. Oh, thank you to my darling sweet mother for that fabulous intro right there. But y'all saw what I was talking about, right? She grabbed me. She maliciously grabbed me. She was going to attack me. It all happened off camera. It's ridiculous. Now, anyway, though, welcome back to your Flip classroom. And welcome back to our reintroduction to what the front door is Europe going to do after Napoleon is exiled that second time, right? So we left off in class before the break talking about how Europe is going to need to get together with all these powerful countries, including Great Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, and then also as well, who's that fifth one? Oh yeah, France, that guy that we're just going to say, sit over there in the corner and shut up. So like the biggest thing about it though is this meeting that is going to happen to try and figure out what to do with all that land that Napoleon took over, which is everything right there highlighted in green, is they're going to actually call this thing known as the Congress of Vienna, right? And the Congress of Vienna is going to be a meeting of all of these different countries to try and establish an era of peace in Europe where there won't be any fighting for like 30 years. And a lot of people call that the Age of Metternich, right? And the reason why they call that the Age of Metternich is because the guy who basically was the architect behind this entire meeting is a man by the name of Clemens von Metternich, who we'll talk about later in this flip, right? A little bit later. Now, the thing about it, though, is the Congress of Vienna's goal was to try and go from this, which was everything that Napoleon took over, right? Napoleonic Europe from 1805 to 1815, and then try to get to this, right? Where they believed they would actually have everything put in its place, where they believed that everything was going to be exactly where it needed to be, and it was also going to place conservative rulers back in power, right? So something that we need to understand about this is that kind of last little tidbit that I just said, right? Putting conservative leaders back in power, right? And the biggest thing that this entire flip is going to be dedicated to is the rise of these things known as the political isms of the 1800s, right? Now, again, big disclaimer, we talked about this a lot in class. We're not talking about conservatives and liberals from now. Okay, disclaimer to any parent that might be listening in the background. We're not talking about conservative and liberals now. We are talking about conservatives and liberals from the 1800s. That's why actually when we get later on this, you'll notice that we have to call them classical liberals, because classical liberals are now modern-day conservatives, right? Now, going into it, though, you have to understand that the conservatives of the era thought this was their goal, right? They wanted to try and get back to the balance of power, right? They wanted to give all of the ruling stake of Europe back to those 5 big, powerful countries, and their goal was this thing known as the Concert of Europe, right? The Concert of Europe is less Nicki Minaj and more Beethoven, right? Like when I actually do a Beethoven clip, all of y'all are like, I don't like classical music. Well, you actually know a lot of it, right? Because if I hit you with a dun 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 dun, yeah, I bet some of y'all just went dun 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 dun. Exactly, right? Everybody knows classical, like Beethoven's Ninth. A lot of people know some of Mozart's like nocturne pieces and things like that. The thing about it, though, is that the conservatives of Europe thought that this right here, this map, was their concert of Europe, right? And that idea that all these different instruments are playing at the exact same time, they were alluding the instruments or groups of instruments to the conservative powers of Europe, that Russia, Prussia, Austria, Great Britain, and France kind of whole thing, and that they were all going to come together to play beautiful music. Now, what most people don't realize is that Behind this music is them slapping around poor people and telling them to go home and stuff like that. But going into it, you have to understand that the goal of the Congress of Vienna was to achieve that map over there to the right, right? To split up what Napoleon took over and give control of Europe back to, or most of Europe, back to Great Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, right? Now, France is going to get their own thing as well. They're going to actually take them back to the boundaries of 1792, which was actually them being very, very nice to France. Now, going into it, though, we need to understand something, though. Russia, Austria, and Prussia at the time were considered very conservative, right? Now, going into what that means now is where we're going to jump over to a clip from an old flip where I'm going to talk and describe about exactly what it meant to be conservative during this time period, okay? So when we talk about this entire thing, or the goals of conservatism, listen along and then actually kind of like jot down the things about conservatives, classical liberals, and socialists, and I'll be right back. First ism that we got to talk about is none other than conservatism, right? And the goals of conservatism are these, right? And I know that y'all are like, wow, this is really, really big and beefy, okay? It is a long description, but you have to understand that basically this lines up with the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class, right? The upper class people that even still existed post-industrial revolution and after Napoleon were the ones that were the greatest affected by the Napoleonic Wars, right? They wanted to come back into power, and they favored absolutism, right? They wanted to restore the Bourbon monarchy to France. They wanted to get rid of Napoleon. They're the ones who decided to exile him a second time to St. Helena, and they are in favor of absolutists, right? Because that's what they know, and they want to conserve the old way. They want to keep things the way they always have been, right? They want to conserve everything that they used to have, right? That is their goal and the ideas of conservatism, right? They favor that absolutist authority. They want to suppress any new revolutions that might pop up because new ideas scare them, right? They want to prevent and destroy any constitutions that could potentially pop up because what do constitutions do? They give people Enlightenment-style rights. The Declaration of the Rights of Man would terrify a conservative, right? They'd be like, wait, we got to let people have freedom of speech? Wait, we got to let them have freedom of religion? But that could take us further out of power. And literally, they don't want those documents to pop up, right? They want to stop the growth of legislative bodies because legislative bodies means that people have the ability to vote. And it means it's injecting the ideas of the general will and Rousseauian logic into society, right? They like the idea that no one really votes. They don't really want anyone to vote. And that's what that's referred to as suffrage, right? They want little to no suffrage if possible. They want to keep the money in the elite classes. They want to keep the money and power within the hands of the old nobles and the monarchs of Europe. And they want to do that by enforcing mercantilism, which we know is a bad idea for economies, and it's beginning to die off, right? They want to tell you you have to buy in this country. They want to tell you that you can't buy from England because that's a big competitor of theirs, right? And they want heavy government involvement in the economics, right? And who likes this? The old nobles and the aristocrats. And who is the best representation of this? This guy right here, right? Jot this man's name down. He is a man by the name of Clemens von Metternich, right? K-L-E-M-E-N-S, Clemens von Metternich. And Metternich spelled M-E-T-T-E-R-N-I-C-H, right? Clemens von Metternich was a prince from the Austrian Empire, and he saw the destruction that Napoleon's rule and then also the Napoleonic Empire and also what the French Revolution was doing, and it was taking people like him out of power, right? Prince Metternich benefited from feudalism. He benefited from the old ways. He benefited from absolutism because the absolutists liked him, and also, if an absolutist died, his family might be next up because he's a royal high-ranking noble, right? He believed that giving people rights was a really good pathway to revolution and a destruction of everything good and peaceful in his mind. Now, when we look at Clemens von Metternich in the modern era, we're like, you're dumb, dude. You're dumb. It's a terrible idea. Having an absolutist is a terrible thing. Giving people rights in a constitution is a good thing, right? And when we look at him, though, he is like the conservative superhero because he is the one, if you want to write down some little extra stuff, that led that Congress of Vienna. He was the representative of the Austrian Empire. He stood at the table being like, everyone will get this, you will get that. France, shut up and sit over there. And so literally he was the one that was like, we need to bring the monarch back to France, right? So yes, Gretchen Bassel, I hate to break it to you, they brought Louis XVI's brother back in as King of France. And it was all because Clemens von Metternich was the guy that came up with it. Another famous one is a guy named by the name of Edmund Burke, who is actually from England and stuff like that, and he's also a conservative advocate there as well. Now, another big ism that pops up during this time, their main enemy are these people known as classical liberals. Now, we talked about this a little bit in class today, that when you have a political spectrum in the modern era, you basically have lumped off to one side and the other, the ideas of conservative over here and liberals over here, right? Well, the interesting thing about it is that is not an old way of looking at things. It's actually, or excuse me, not a new way of looking at things. It's actually rather old, right? And so the next ism that we're talking about is classical liberalism, right? So we have conservatism, and now we have classical liberalism. Now, why do I add the word classical on there? You have to call them classical liberals because classical liberals are now modern-day conservatives, right? Conservatives actually, in the modern era, would love the ideas of a classical liberal, right? And they were called classical liberals, and we have to call them that so we don't get the waters all muddied, right? So going into it, you have to understand the goals of classical liberals was to, one, grow the industrial era and keep pushing for economic growth because classical liberals believed in a dog-eat-dog, every man for himself, individualized idea of society. They thought that if every person did right for themselves, then society would progress forward at an exponential rate. So they believed that if you over there went off and started your own business and got after it and made money, then great for you, right? And the idea of every man for himself. Now, when we're looking at this, what type of economics does that favor? They loved laissez-faire economics, which means little to no government intervention, right? Low taxes, if any at all, and then also capitalism. They love the idea of capitalism because it puts the money in the hands of individuals, and then it makes it so the government only taxes enough to provide for itself, a defense, and the common good of people, right? They also want to limit the power of monarchs. They want a constitution. A big thing that we need to understand about it is they believe in constitutions. Write that down somewhere. They really believe, oh no, it's right here. They want to expand suffrage to more people, not all. They don't want everyone to vote because they're like, poor people don't know how to vote with anything but their stomach. That's a famous line that they would always say. They would always be like, oh, poor people vote with their stomachs, right? Saying, oh, they'll vote for anybody that gives them food, right? So they want to expand suffrage and voting to more people in the middle class. And they want to outline those rights in the constitutions, and they want their natural rights. So they believe in the ideas of John Locke, right? The ideas of life, liberty, and property. They want to expand legislative bodies. They want British-style government. They want a parliament with an upper and a lower house that represents the people, that will give rights to people and function as the intermediary of how tax money is spent. Not to be spent on an absolutist, but to be spent on the common good and kept low enough to where it isn't touching people's profits, right? They also want to grow the wealth in the common classes of society. And who likes this concept? The middle class, right? The middle class and the bourgeois from France. They love this concept. They love the ideas of Adam Smith, who outlined the ideas of capitalism in his book called The Wealth of Nations. And a person that represents a classical liberal is none other than the Marquis de Lafayette, right? A former, or a noble himself, but who actually believed in the ideas of the Enlightenment in the French Revolution, and that the people of France needed a constitution to outline their basic rights, to make sure that no monarch or noble was taking them away, right? And he was a noble himself, right? And another big famous classical liberal you could look at is Thomas Jefferson, right? Thomas Jefferson helped with the Marquis de Lafayette write the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And he himself wrote the Declaration of Independence and helped write the Constitution of the United States of America, right? Those are your classical liberals, those middle-class people who want to do all those different things, right? And then your third ism that's going to be very, very important, that's going to scare the bejesus out of everybody, are the socialists, right? The socialists that are going to begin to pop up in the late 1800s, right? Now, the goals of socialism is highly different from the other two isms, and it scares both of them to death, right? The goal of socialism is to move away from individualism and more towards a collective, right? It's the idea that we are all in this together and that we should have smaller communities, not these massive cities, and that they also believe in the idea that every man contributes to society, right? And when they contribute their goods and their labor, then they will then receive from their government and their fellow brothers in arms other goods that they need, right? So in these smaller communities, you had some utopian socialists that were actually started by this guy, Henri de Saint-Simon, who believed that literally small little cities where they didn't even really use money and private property was abolished and everyone shared everything would be a more peaceful existence. They also believe that in these communities that everyone should be allowed to vote because they believe in universal suffrage, not limited suffrage like the classical liberals did. They also believe that you should get rid of kings altogether. No more kings whatsoever, that legislative bodies should be completely in control. See what I'm talking about, that variant scale? Classical liberals believed, like, keep a king, it's fine, but he needs to be a constitutional monarch, right? And then the conservatives are like, oh no, absolute monarch, right? Socialists are like, how about no king at all, right? Like, no king at all, that is just a vestige of the old upper class, right? They're like, instead, let the parliament be completely in charge, right? They also want a planned economy, right? They want a planned economy where basically there's no competition, no capitalism, where everyone has certain roles, they all do work that they enjoy, and then also going into it as well, the socialists believe that there should be planned economics for goods and services that everyone needs, right? For example, a socialist idea would be setting the price of bread, right? Or a socialist idea at the time would be like universal health care, right? Which a lot of these other figures are actually going to gravitate towards later on, because you got to give them something to keep them from getting all freaked out and then burning stuff down in the streets. They also want natural rights, except the private property one, because they want to like limit it as much as they can. They want to redistribute wealth and goods in society. And who likes this concept? None other than the industrial lower class and the lower end of the middle class, right? Because there's a lot of different types of socialists. A lot of people, when they actually want to know where socialism came from, a lot of them point the finger to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right? They talk about how he wants like everyone to move out into the woods, provide for themselves, to educate their own children and things like that. And so we believe that he might be that earliest form of a socialist, like a proto-socialist, right? Now this guy, though, is going to take socialism 2 steps further, and that guy is none other than Karl Marx, right? Write that name down, Karl Marx, K-A-R-L-M-A-R-X, right? Karl Marx actually took socialism a step further and said, no, we need to have communism. And he's going to actually create the idea known as communism outlined in his book known as the Communist Manifesto, right? So he's going to be an important figure there going forward. So do me a favor, write down Karl Marx, right? Because he's going to be very important. Now, going into it, we need to Exactly! Thank you, Mr. Terry from the past. We do really, really appreciate you every time you pop up to make it so that Mr. Terry doesn't have to keep talking about things he doesn't want to talk about, because I hate talking about the political isms from the 1800s. I don't think you understand. But they're still very important to understanding a latter part of the unit, right? So when we actually talk about these different like groups and these isms and stuff like that, we're actually going to come back to them, because what we're about to do right now is we're about to rewind all the way back to when Napoleon was in power. And actually even before Napoleon was in power. We're going to rewind all the way back to the latter phases of the French Revolution, where we're about to go from that liberal phase into that radical phase, right? We're going to talk about the era of French Revolution where the Committee of Public Safety is about to be rising up, right? So yes, we are jumping back in time right now to the 1790s, okay? Now, I know that's going to frustrate some of y'all, because you're all like, Mr. Terry, why do we have to do it like that? That's so annoying. Well, the thing about it, though, is you have to understand, it just makes more sense this way, right? Because when we're getting into now is you have to understand that Napoleon and the French Revolution are going to have massive effects on the international scale, right? They're not just going to affect things going on in Europe. They're going to affect things going on thousands of miles away, right? And it's going to lead to maps not looking like this so much anymore, where they were controlled by Spain, and then, of course, the Viceroyalty of Brazil, which was also at one point like actually owned by Portugal, right? And actually, Brazil is going to be its own brand new country because of Napoleon's actions, right? And it actually reads this whole thing that if any of y'all have ever had actually Mr. Wooderson, right? If any of y'all had Mr. Wooderson in class, then y'all know or have heard of this guy named Dom Pedro, right? Dom Pedro was this dude from Portugal who ran over to Brazil to stay there when Napoleon was invading and stuff like that during his Peninsular campaign, and then he just never left, and he became the very first king of Brazil, right? So going into it, though, as you can tell with that little example, you're going to see the growth of a bunch of new countries, and you're going to see maps going looking like that to looking like this, right? You're going to see cultural groups break away and begin to create their own new areas and their own new cultural things, right? So going into it, what you have to understand is that there is a background to this, though, right? The background is the fact that before the Europeans even got there, there were natives there already, right? And we talked about them already when we talked about the age of European discovery, right? They didn't discover squat because there were already people there, but that's neither here nor there. The native people, though, were major tribes like the Mayas, the Aztecs, the Incas, the people that they took over, and then also you've got your North American tribes as well, including some, for example, in this area, the Bayagula, the Homa, you also have the Cherokee over on the East Coast, right? The Iroquois up in the Northeast, right? And you have the Apache out west as well as Comanche Sioux, and you could just keep going for days, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is that European colonization is mostly going to take place from the 1500s, right? Particularly by Spain, Portugal, France, and also in the late 1500s going into the 1600s, what you're going to see is actually the growth of English colonies, where the 13 original colonies are going to be, right? But the thing that you need to understand is that the French Revolution was caused by a subsequent set of events that came before it, right? And then the thing about it is that the French Revolution and Napoleon's rise to power is then going to cause later events as well, right? The thing that you need to understand about history is it's all cause and effect, push and pull factors, etc., right? So when we look at this, we actually can see that the English Glorious Revolution, this should say Glorious Revolution, English Revolution sounds silly, but the thing about it is the Glorious Revolution that happens on the outskirts of the English Civil War, the Roundheads and the Cavaliers, Charles I, all that fun stuff, right, is going to occur, right? And the Glorious Revolution is going to occur when James II gets ran off from power by his daughter, Mary, and her husband, William, from the Netherlands, right? When this whole thing happens and a new government takes over and they bring in this thing called the English Bill of Rights, that's going to inspire the Enlightenment. And Enlightenment thinkers are going to begin to theorize, how can we make society and governments better, right? That then inspired the American Revolution when the Americans were like, oh, we love some John Locke, we love some Baron de Montesquieu, we love these Enlightenment thinkers, and they're going to have a revolution of their own to break away and create a brand new country. Now, the American Revolution then inspired the French Revolution, which inspired Napoleon to pop up. But the thing about it that you need to understand is that the French Revolution and Napoleon inspired Latin American independence and self-determination in Europe, okay? Now, Latin American independence, what I mean by that is there are going to be heavy amounts of liberation movements that are going to be much like the American Revolution, where these people that lived now in these colonies are now so many generations removed from their original European colonizers that they consider themselves a brand new type of people, right? They consider themselves either Honduran or Venezuelan, or they consider themselves Brazilian, right? And the thing about it is they're going to eventually see the French Revolution as an opportune time to break away completely and lead liberation movements against their original colonizers, right? Now, later on, you're going to see this thing called self-determination in Europe pop up, where people like Italy and Germany are going to decide to get together and form their own new countries, right? Now, that's self-determination. Latin American independence, though, is what we're about to talk about now, okay? Now, we could talk for days about a lot of different examples, right? We could talk about Benito Juarez in Mexico, right? We could talk about the Mexican Revolutionary Movement that lasts for over 100 years. We could talk about Simón Bolívar in northern Latin America, right? And his actual conglomeration of this area known as Gran Colombia, right? We could talk about him. We could talk about José de San Martín and how he actually fought with Simón Bolívar and how they kind of met in the middle and stuff like that. We could talk about that stuff for days, but the one that we're going to talk about instead is actually going to be focusing on the revolutionary movement that occurs in Saint-Domingue, which is a French colony, right? So we can talk about directly about the effects of the French Revolution. And the other thing that we're going to pick up on is talking about how that colony of Saint-Domingue eventually becomes the modern-day country that you know of today as Haiti. All right, so but we'll get into that in class when I see y'all back from break. Y'all have a great one. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.